Welcome to Satsunami. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Satsunami. I'm Satsunami and joining me today is a very good friend of mine. You may have heard his voice on the channel before. We have done a couple of quite memorable co-streams together, from Warzone to Pokemon Emerald. I'm of course talking about my very good friend Andrew, who you may also know as Greenshield 95 on Twitch. Hello Andrew, welcome to Satsunami.
Hi everyone, thanks for having me, Satsunami. It's always good to be on Twitch and to make my podcast debut.
Glad you pointed that out, that this is your first episode. It has been long overdue to have you on Satsunami, I have to admit, but no, thank you so much for agreeing to come on and not being scared off from the other ones.
I'm looking forward to it.
So yeah, as you can see by the title today, we are both going to be talking about a very special, that would be right to say, wouldn't it? A very special show to both you and I.
I think so. It's something we both bonded over very early on in our friendship, and something that we reference still. I must be eight years on.
It's a bad habit that we're trying to kick, I swear. Yeah, first the Star Wars references, and then the Simpsons references will come next. That's for sure. But yeah, today we are going to be talking about the very first part of the, I would say, widely acclaimed show. So we're talking
cult classic.
Cult classic, yeah, that's probably a better word for it. Yeah, today we're going to be talking about the show Star Wars: The Clone Wars, and this time
just Clone Wars.
Oh, is it just Clone Wars?
That's how you distinguish between the two, because the new one is The Clone Wars, and this one is just Star Wars Clone Wars, and then sometimes it's done as bracket 2003.
Well, it's The Clone Wars to our hearts, because it's infinitely cooler than the other one.
I won't correct you again if you refer to it as The Clone Wars, because that's how I often refer to it as well. But I thought just before I thought I'd get there before the commenters do.
Oh yeah, absolutely. They'll be hounding us in the comments. Yeah, exactly. So yeah, as you can see, we are going to be talking about the Clone Wars 2003. We're going to be focusing on the first part of it. So this is a series made by a quite famous animator, Genndy Tartakovsky, who you may have heard the name attached to other Cartoon Network titles such as Dexter's Laboratory and most famously Samurai Jack, which I know you have a long history with.
Yeah, as long as my history with the show we're talking about today, I watched Samurai Jack throughout my childhood, and I absolutely loved it. Loved the creator, loved his animation style, and so I was very excited to work on a project like this.
No, it's a very good TV show though. So before we get into really the meat about kind of dissecting this amazing show, how did you get into the show initially when you were younger?
As I'm sure many did at the time. I was a child, and I found it on Cartoon Network. I don't think I was the biggest Star Wars fan prior to this. I had watched certainly bits of the original, but my main kind of experience with Star Wars was the Phantom Menace and then Attack of the Clones. Growing up in that time, though that I didn't know any difference. I didn't know that there was a level of disdain towards those properties. I thought there was just awesome Star Wars, cool Star Wars fighting kind of stuff, and the originals were a lot slower and a lot less fights. And so to young Greenshield, I viewed them very differently, and I thought that the originals, the prequels, were much more interesting. And so when there was a cartoon series that kind of explored that even further, I was very excited, and I tuned in regularly on Cartoon Network to watch it.
I think I was in the same boat, because I think it was probably when I got into Star Wars, I got into the original films, and then of course when we were younger the prequels had come out. And that was kind of a domino effect of, watching the kind of cool lightsaber fights and things like that, and the Phantom Menace, then going to the not as widely regarded, I think even back then for kids, like the Clone Wars, Attack of the Clones, wasn't as popular a film Um,
Again, I wasn't aware of that at the time. I thought
mm,
everyone loved it, and I adored Attack of the Clones
mhm.
at that age. So when I remember being very surprised when I heard years later the hatred towards the prequels, and I was like, "What do you mean? I thought everyone loved them."
No, I was just going to say, I have to admit, when I was younger, like, there was always kind of a niggling feeling in the back of my head when I watched Attack of the Clones, thinking, this isn't as good as the other ones. Like, I still enjoyed it, but I remember getting it on DVD and then just skipping to the action scenes. So I would skip to, like, the Jango Fett scene, skip over the love dialogue when I was younger, then go to, Geonosis and the clones attacking and everything, and then I'd be like, what a great film. So I would skip out the
I did.
sand talk. I would skip out the all the Tatooine stuff. Yeah.
I did as a child remember being quite
Mm-hmm.
bored during certain scenes. Like even I remember even during the assassin scene at the very start of Attack of
Mm-hmm.
the Clones, which is arguably one of the more interesting scenes in it.
Mm-hmm.
I remember being really bored at the time watching that, but
Yeah.
just the whole thing with like the clone army and like the amount of Jedis that are fighting, and you had Yoda doing flips, which
Oh yeah.
looking back, you're a bit like, oh, it does like make Yoda seem a bit different to how he was traditionally portrayed, and so there's some criticism there, but at the time, I had so not rose-tinted glasses because that's suggests nostalgia, but at the
Mm-hmm.
time, I thought it was incredible,
Mm-hmm.
and yeah, and I think that's what leads us on to the cartoon series when it came out.
Yeah, because we were just talking about this before we came on, where it was about 3 years, wasn't it, between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith?
Yeah, I hadn't realized until just today, or I must have done at some point, that there was a 3 year gap between the second and third film in the prequels. And so the only real content you were getting in those 3 years was the this Clone Wars cartoon series,
Mm-hmm.
which then introduces you to characters who you would then meet in the next film,
Mm-hmm.
like a certain villain that we'll inevitably talk about in later on in this episode.
And yeah, there was that kind of vacuum between waiting for like just getting over Attack of the Clones, and then there was like loads of games, there was comics, there was like books and things, but nothing really stood out more than what we're going to talk about just now. What ended up following was this. I don't think anyone really expected it, but it was just this out of the blue cartoon, wasn't it? From Cartoon Network, and it initially began as like about 3 to 5 minutes. So it was like a continuous story, wasn't it?
It was and it
Mm,
wasn't. There was certain aspects
mm,
of it being episodic, and there was certain
mm-hmm,
serialized aspects of it. But yeah, so it did kind of jump from one short segment to the other, but would sometimes return to a segment that it addressed previously. And it would, and I remember it being very bizarre at the time, where you just
mm-hmm,
get kind of snippets of a show
mm-hmm,
on Cartoon Network. And so it was a very interesting concept, one that like they haven't really explored again for cartoons, as far as I'm
mm-hmm.
aware, where they have these small little snippets in between other shows.
I remember when I was younger, and this was the time I was still in high school, and I remember trying to run back home to try and catch these episodes because they kind of came on like, yeah, they would just like come on and then they would be off like instantly. So you would get like this really flashy lightsaber battle, or you catch the tail end of it, and then that was it. Just gone
Hmm.
from existence. I don't think it was until like a couple of years later where I managed to like sit down and watch it from start to finish,
Hmm.
which yeah was an absolute lifesaver. Getting the DVDs and just managing to sit through it.
I don't believe I ever got the like any physical media for it. So I would just rely on its syndication on Cartoon
Hmm.
Network. But there were certain episodes I remember watching over and over and over again. The very last episode in particular was one that I watched a lot of. But then many years later, I discovered that the entirety of it was posted on YouTube,
Hmm.
and so I was able to watch it through that means. And the recent announcement that the entire series is going to be put onto Disney Plus, that is hopefully going to encourage a new generation of fans and old fans as well to watch it on there. And rediscover it.
And I do hope that it kind of sparks a new interest in it, because it's a great series and it does deserve like a lot of love. But before we go into like dissecting, like the bits we like, the bits we think maybe didn't work as well, Andrew, do you want to give like a brief overview of what this first part especially is about?
So the first half, it covers a lot of different topics. We're looking at the rise of the clone troopers, these clones that were made in the second Star Wars movie that we were introduced to then. What they are being utilized for by the Republic, and then we're exploring the adventures of both Anakin Skywalker and Obi-Wan, who in between these films, Anakin is still a Padawan, and so is trying to earn his way to being a Jedi Knight and exploring various different themes of how he's going to earn passageway to being a Jedi Knight. And then we're also exploring lots of different characters throughout. So we're meeting new Jedi and fighting off the Separatist threat.
And would you say that this fleshes out the story that was started in Attack of the Clones?
I think so. I think it dives a lot deeper into what the clones were created for, what they can do, and military tactics sort of surrounding the Republic and the Separatist armies. Something that I don't think any of the movies delves that deeply into. And we should also note the elephant in the room of the Clone Wars, the CGI cartoon, which I think we're both fans of. I have not completely finished it. I know you have. There's very different themes in that, but this one I think delves much more into an aesthetic and establishing a world, as opposed to the much more dialogue and story driven later series.
Oh yeah, because for the 2008 Clone Wars, the CGI one, it's definitely a lot more slower in some regards, and it's a lot more, and this is going to sound weird considering it's like a space fantasy series, but it does kind of ground itself in a bit of reality when it comes to like warfare. And sorry, I think I've described this like this to you before, but it's like trying to explain war to children. It can be enjoyed, by adults and kids anyway, but I do think it does an amazing job at breaking down and describing, like from, all the cheery subjects you want to teach kids, from war crimes to tactics, that kind of thing. Whereas for this one, it's got like a heavy emphasis on the action, and there's actually nothing really wrong with that. It's like, I think it's something that the series probably needed at the time, because one of the main criticisms of the prequels was the kind of political dialogue. Probably one day in the future episode we will talk about the 2008 series, but for this one, having like 3-minute episodes where it was just like a heap of action to catch like kids' eyes, to be like, oh look, that's Jedi Master Anakin Skywalker fighting against this random assassin, like just complete, bombarding you with these amazing visuals. And especially for Genndy's art style, it's just beautiful, isn't it?
The art style is gorgeous, and he really focuses on the choreographed fighting and just lots of little elements, like for example, the clone troopers don't talk to each other as much as they do in the later series. They're more fond of using like hand signals, like you might see in a military combat in the Middle East or elsewhere in a more modern setting. And it's very interesting how so many episodes have either little dialogue, or I think there's probably been a few with no dialogue, which is just incredible when you think of, it's very, very ahead of its time, and it's something that Genndy Tartakovsky has done his other properties, such as Samurai Jack and more recently with the show Primal, which is entirely without dialogue, and it takes place in a kind of caveman setting with dinosaurs. It's almost like a dark Flintstones.
I'll actually need to check that out.
I recommend you do it. If you like the Clone Wars, then the two shows that I think you should watch are Samurai Jack and Primal. And if you've seen Samurai Jack and you haven't seen this, then likewise you should definitely check out Star Wars Clone Wars.
It's funny you should mention that when you're talking about the dialogueless episodes, because I'm just thinking back to the very first episode, and other than the very beginning, obviously with the intro, and I think there's a certain point where it almost becomes like a silent film. So basically the first episode kind of focuses on the invasion of Moonalist, which is where for all you Star Wars fans out there, it's where the banking clan comes from. They basically invade, and the episode centres around these ARC troopers who, I'm sure you'll agree as well, Andrew, they are the coolest thing or second coolest thing of this series.
Yeah, I think that the way they portray the troopers is so much more interesting than how they delve into it within both Attack of the Clones, and also in the original series with the Stormtroopers, which I know they are different, the Stormtroopers and the Clone Troopers, but you get a lot more identity throughout this series than you had seen previously, with what appears to be faceless men, and you establish different ranks within the troopers, and responsibilities and different jobs that each of them have. There's the sort of heavy duty ones that has a giant like minigun, and the ones with the snipers, and all these different kinds of roles, which I wouldn't be able to name, but it's very identifiable what they do based on their design and the weapons they carry.
I do think that is like one of the strengths of the series, though, isn't it? Beyond like the design of it, everything the series kind of sets out to do is very creative and iconic. Like, for example, there's a whole episode that, again, has little to no dialogue, and it's basically set underwater. I think that you know the one I'm talking about, the Kit Fisto one.
Yeah, so the introduction of Kit Fisto, who, if viewers are not aware, do you know his species?
Squid Man, probably. I actually don't know.
He has like tentacle things coming out the back of his head. He's green, and he's a Jedi that can swim underwater, or rather breathe underwater. Everyone can swim underwater.
Yeah.
Breathe underwater, and he fights underwater, and he has a very unique kind of fighting style based on that it's essentially like watching someone fly with a lightsaber as he sort of travels through the water and fights off the threat against the Mon Calamari.
I feel as if the series does capitalise on like the environment it sets. So like, for example, for that one, Kit Fisto uses the Force to create like these giant bubbles, or should I say death bubbles, essentially.
Oh yes, he condenses the water with the Force and uses it almost as like a cannon. It's very interesting. That's one of the real strengths of the show, of like unique ways of using the Force that you don't see really in any other property.
There's an episode where they're set out in an open field, and essentially they've just got a giant hole punch, haven't they? The droids. Because that's what
I kind of refer to it as like a big hammer that they had, but it is quite apt to think of it like almost like a hole punch.
Yeah, because the thing is, it's like if you introduce that now, it would kind of be like, even in the more realistic Clone Wars CGI series, I think that would probably, people would look at it and think, okay, this is a bit weird and far-fetched, but for this series, it fits. Like, it fits so perfectly, though, doesn't it?
It does, but like one of the things about it is it's so ridiculous because it's so impractical. It's a giant hovering like ship that's entire purpose is to just whack the ground really hard with a metal thing, and not only are you taking out your own men with this weapon, which, because it is more, they're taking out more of their own guys than they are the enemy with this weapon. But also just a laser would have done just much like better job surely than this like big hammer thing.
I get the feeling that someone in the Separatists probably designed this and they didn't want to hurt his feelings, so they were like, yeah, you know, this planet we're not too keen on, let's just test it on that. Because
it was definitely like Palpatine's like grandson who just like proposed it, and they're like, we can't say no to him.
Yeah, and Jimothy Palpatine just like, look what I drew, and he put it on like the fridge, but what he didn't realise was that's where all the Separatist plans were, and they're just like, all
the Separatist blueprints go on the fridge.
Yeah, just kind of over the top. I mean, another episode, going back to the invasion of Minimalist, is when they literally have, what is it again? It's like they have jousting speeders.
Yeah. I knew you were going to bring that up. I made a note of that when I watched it the other day. That just why in this world where everything is lightsabers and like laser guns, why do they have jousting sticks? What purpose are they using those for?
Cool though. Like
It
this is
is, and that's the thing, and
yeah.
that's what he does.
Hmm.
He does aesthetic, and
Hmm.
like it's one hell of an aesthetic. But it like very if you like stop to think about it, you're just like, this is stupid.
Yeah, there's just so much of this. You think like, see if it was in the films or anything else, you would think this is so ridiculous and over the top.
Could you imagine in the most recent movies if they'd introduced something like that, it would get absolutely ripped apart by the fanboys.
Oh, absolutely. But I'm just thinking of like so much, so much stuff that happens like throughout it because it's just basically how bizarre the series is in terms of its designs, its characters, and things. And as you said, if they did that nowadays, it would kind of be like, oh, this is ridiculous. Oh, they're just pandering to the rule of cool. But back then, there was this like huge vacuum, and there wasn't a lot of Star Wars content coming out then. Or there was Star Wars content, but you know, like
Hmm.
this was the main one. This was the main series, people beyond the games and things that people were latching onto. And yeah, I think it left its much like the giant hole punch. It left its impression on us. Oh,
Within that episode as well, we are introduced to what Mace Windu, played by Samuel L. Jackson in the live action movies, but voiced by a different actor in the show. What he can do, you kind of got a feeling that he was quite a senior member of the Jedi Council, and that
mhm,
he was very strong, but you didn't really get to see that much of what he could do.
mhm,
In this episode, we are introduced to him, and he develops some sort of forest-based martial arts where he's essentially punching the droids at
mhm.
rapid speeds, supposedly using the force while he's doing it. So he's just completely dismantling these droids just by like punching and like karate chopping them.
I still maintain to this day that that wasn't the Force. He literally just uses bare hands and he just bet them all up. He's that much of a Force badass that he just bet them up. One of my favourite kills from that episode is when he goes up to one of the droids and he puts his hand out to use the Force, and all of the screws come out. Of the like, so he's face to face with this super battle droid, this big hulking machine. He puts his hand out, all the screws come out of him, and it just like collapses into a heap. And then he uses that as projectiles to like destroy all the other droids behind him. It's just fantastic, and I could
Hmm.
fanboy about this for hours, but like just a single episode to be like, oh, this is amazing.
Yeah,
Um,
that episode in particular is absolutely fantastic. And if anyone wants to talk to me more about it, then
yeah.
you can feel free to. Because like I too could talk about that for ages. What I also was introduced to in the series, and you correct me if you know of a different time when this has been introduced, but the creation of the lightsaber, that we
Yeah.
see a lightsaber being created, we see the crystal, the force crystal going
Mhm.
inside. I don't think prior to this that I even knew there was a crystal inside of a lightsaber.
Well, see, this is kind of technically, no, there wasn't. Unless it's been like mentioned in a book or things, but we're not going to count that,
Hmm.
like outside of the media. But there technically is apparently a deleted scene where in Return of the Jedi, Luke's building his new lightsaber. And I always remember watching the video for when that was introduced. And it's literally just him like screwing in the parts of his lightsaber. And see the fanboys watching it, they were going absolutely. Honestly, it was like, when you go to like a football stadium and one of the teams have
Yeah.
won and they're just going mental. That's what it was like. They're like, oh my god, he's building his lightsaber. And you're like, yeah, yeah, okay. just calm down, guys, calm down. It's just a lightsaber. But yeah, going back to your point, yeah, I think that is the first time you see like a visual representation of that and the idea of the crystals. Because it's not in. No, I don't think it is in any of the other films.
I don't think any film actually discusses the creation of a lightsaber. I think it only gets discussed in both this and in the Clone Wars
Yeah,
2008. I'm sure it's mentioned in the Star Wars comics, in the books
yeah,
and whatnot,
probably. The
but
encyclopedia.
in in actual like physical media, in or rather in film and television, I think the only time it's mentioned is in these two series, which is it's incredible.
No, you're definitely
Mhm.
right. And that is cool that they kind of. Because it's weird, do you think because there's so much emphasis on action that's all it's going to be? And don't get me wrong, like 90% of this is like cool over the top action, but there are like kind of in between episodes. Like as I said, there's the one with Kit Fisto where it's like a one off. He just goes down to save Mon Calamari from I can't even remember like what, like evil shrimp people.
Yeah, the squid guys who
Yeah.
I forgot the name for. I think it was the first time I was introduced to them as well.
Yeah, I mean, I do remember them. I vaguely remember seeing them pop up. But yeah, like, there's that episode, and then there's the episode you're talking about. In fact, I think that might have been two episodes, but I could be wrong. Probably two episodes back to back, but it's the episode where you see Jedi making their lightsabers and Yoda coming to save them, and then the
Yeah.
majority of it's focused on the invasion of the Republic on this world, and the kind of subplot about Dooku hiring this assassin to go hunt down Anakin.
And the assassin in question is Asajj Ventress, who those who have watched the 2008 Clone Wars will be very familiar with Asajj Ventress, but this was our introduction to her in the 2003 Clone Wars series. She isn't as well developed in this as she later is in the other series, and she isn't in it as long either. She's only in it for a couple of segments. But you get a lot of the basic, or rather the fundamentals of what the character is and what she will still be in the later season. What is worth noting as well is that this is no longer considered to be canon. I don't believe. I think, I think Disney when they acquired Lucasfilm, they drew the line as to what was to be maintained as canon and what wasn't. And unfortunately, Star Wars Clone Wars 2003 series didn't make the cut. And so a lot of what we're seeing is it maintains to be my head canon, but is not official canon within the Star Wars universe.
I think it's probably the Harley Quinn effect, isn't it? Where it's a character that's been introduced in something like another show, and it's like the character themselves have become so popular that they've just taken them and then put them into the official canon.
Mm-hmm.
Because
That's quite possible. It's quite possible. It's also quite likely that George Lucas was such a fan of various concepts and characters that he wanted it to be carried over into the new series when the new Clone Wars series came into being.
Yeah, she was like concept art for another character, I'm sure, and they kept her in as this other character. And I do like the fact that with this series, although there's not much development, I mean, I think this is probably a good time for us to talk about the characters, because I don't know, I feel as if the villains by far are better than the heroes in this case, with the exception of like a couple of noticeable examples. So, for example, for the heroes, I feel as if like Mace Windu, Kit Fisto, the clones especially, they're all like shining examples of characters that kind of stick in your mind because they do like so many amazing things, like from the art.
I think Obi-Wan deserves a spot there because they do some very interesting stuff. They do some very interesting stuff with Obi-Wan in particular. Since this is a very small thing, but for much of the show, especially when he's in the battle scene, he's wearing the armor that the clone troopers also wear, which kind of establishes it as a more like united, unifying kind of uniform.
I always thought that was so cool when I watched it. Though.
Yes, his look when he's got the cape and the clone trooper outfit and the lightsaber. It looks really cool, and it's something that I don't think gets explored again in other properties, but it's such a I'm going to say this word a lot, and I have already said this word a lot, but the aesthetic is just unbelievable with what they do. I think Genndy was given the property to work with, and I think he went flying with it. He went full on into the property and really sort of took a big bite out of what he could get from Star Wars.
I actually think that's what George Lucas said behind the scenes. He said that he wanted something similar to anime for Star Wars during that time, and I think that's kind of what inspired him to go to Genndy to create like this kind of, because obviously it's not anime, but it is very anime like
Western rather anime inspired Western cartoon.
And it's as you were saying, sorry, I'm going to borrow this word from you, but the aesthetic of it is just such a distinctive one. Like, it's something that as soon as you see the characters, the way they fight, it's just Clone Wars 2003. It's just that show, and you immediately pick it up and think, this is amazing. But yeah, sorry, going back to the characters quickly. Yeah, the only character I feel as if isn't as good, except for his fight with Ventress, as Anakin. I feel as if he is just... I don't know if it's just they didn't know what to do with him, or they thought, just keep him like a whiny Padawan.
He's very different in this property than he is in the later series. They keep him... I think he's a lot more like the movies in this than he is in the newer series, but I do think that there is a lot lacking with his character in this series and the development of him. But they try to show his descent from being a typical Padawan him to his descent towards the dark side to try and make it more apparent when he switches over in the third prequel movie. Because this does act, as we've already said, this acts as a bridging property between the two. And so lots of the events in this show are supposed to connect the prior movie to the next one. And there's lots of little aspects of that, which we'll delve into at a later point.
One more kind of thing just about... Don't worry, I'll hop off the hating Anakin train for a second. Or not hating, but just mildly annoyed. But there's one standout moment in the series, and as I was saying, that's when he gets lured to this... I was about to say island, it's not an island. Yeah, lured to this... Yeah, this tropical planet. I think it's actually meant to be the same, and I could be wrong on this again, but is it not like Yavin 4 or the moon of Yavin 4, the same place that the original trilogy takes place, at least in the fourth one, where it's like the rebel base there? I think it's meant to be if it's not the same planet, then I think it's meant to be a similar design.
I can't say I can remember it but well enough just to say.
Yeah, this is another fact checking edit, don't worry. I'm sure it's something like that, but yeah, there's a huge fight scene between, although it does start quite humorously, where he lands on the planet and then a couple of clone troopers follow him to help him, and then he turns around and he's like, something's not right, and they're all gone because she's just murdered them and blown them up and everything.
One thing that they do in this is, in the original movies, the phrase that gets said all the time is, I have a bad feeling about this.
Oh yeah.
And it's supposedly one of the most used lines in all of Hollywood. In all Hollywood movies, that line is one of the most utilized lines. And they go ham with it in this show. I don't know if you picked up on it, and if you have a rewatch of it, you might notice it now. But they fit that in to almost every scene where one character will say, I have a bad feeling about this.
Yeah.
It's usually Anakin or Obi-Wan, but there are other characters that also say it.
Yeah, because they also do it for the 2008 Clone Wars as well, where it's randomly they'll be in the middle of this life and death battle and they'll go, oh, I've got a bad feeling about this, and it's you're not in Tesco's or, you're not in the supermarket paying for your shopping and your card doesn't scan. It's you're literally about to die. You should have more than a bad feeling. It's I think it's because if we're watching it back to back, kind of going off on a slight tangent here, but I remember during the lockdown I was watching, and I know this is heresy to bring up in a Star Wars podcast episode, but I was watching Deep Space Nine, and in that, I know, heresy, but if you put your pitchforks down for just a minute, let me explain. So there's a character in that who's genetically engineered, and the Deep Space Nine it's got more of a continual story rather than being episodic like the previous series. And as I was saying, one character's revealed to be genetically altered, which is a big taboo in the universe. But in every single episode, see if you were watching this on TV, you probably wouldn't pick up on it as much or be annoyed. But because I was binging it and watching it episode after episode, they would always draw attention to the fact that this character was genetically engineered. And it would just be through the most random things. It would be oh, I'm going to drink another drink. And it's why? Because you're genetically engineered? And it's kind of similar to that idea of, the repeated catchphrase, I've got a bad feeling about this. I think if we were watching it as kids, we might notice it, but we might think, oh no, maybe I'm just misremembering it. But because we're watching it episode after episode, it's yeah. So yeah, sorry, that was a long way to say, yeah, I agree with you. It's very great.
Yeah.
So yeah, let's talk about the villains then, because that is definitely a highlight of the, well, especially the first part. Yeah, there's one villain that we have been kind of holding off talking about, haven't we?
Yes. So the one I assume you're referring to General Grievous.
That's the one, yeah. Of course, yeah, the one, the only General Grievous, which is just... Yeah, do you want to explain, like, his introduction? Because I feel as if there's, like, amazing villains in this series. You've got, you know, as we said, you've got Asajj Ventress, who is this mysterious Jedi assassin. You've got Dirge, who is this, like, well, not shape-shifting, but, like, this mutant, like, held together in this, like, suit of armour, who's really cool and keeps regenerating and causes a lot of issues. You know, you've got Count Dooku, of course. But I think one character that stands out amongst all of them is the introduction of General Grievous. So, sorry, I'll hand it over to you.
So the way they introduce him is, and it's so iconic. You'll be able to see the on YouTube. It'll have probably have millions of views because it's one of the fandom's favorite scenes of his introduction. Essentially, a group of Jedi, both Jedi Knights, Masters, and Padawan, are holed up in this kind of bunker area, surrounded by droids, and they're scared because of both they're surrounded by these droids and also they know of a threat outside. We don't, as the audience, yet know what this threat is, who this is, what's going on. But they're getting more and more scared, and they can hear something. And then a Padawan who looks a bit like Shaggy from Scooby Doo, out of sheer sort of terror, just runs out to try and escape or just like fight his way out. And as soon as he runs out, General Grievous drops down and slams him to the ground, instantly kills him, and then sleuths away. It's almost like a xenomorph from the Alien franchise. Sleuths away, and everyone's terrified what's happening. And he jumps down, appears, fights off multiple Jedi, and jumps away and comes back. And it's you can see the fear in the Jedi there that are fighting him and are clearly losing. Mm-hmm. And it's just one of the most interesting scenes in the entire Star Wars franchise. I think it's so well done. There's so little dialogue, and just everything is shown as in the cartoon, in the animation. Mm-hmm. And yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. It's one of the final scenes of the first season.
Because I think the interesting thing was that was like the last part that you're left with. So basically, as you were saying, what happens is he drops down on that Jedi that looks like Shaggy from Scooby-Doo, but fun fact, apparently that is the Jedi's name, Shaggy or something like that. Like they actually did. Yeah, no, they actually did call him that.
That's funny.
Like in the Star Wars spelling or whatever, but it is quite funny. But he because this is the interesting thing, like with a lot of the villains, as soon as they're confronted or they're confronting their prey, let's say, with Dirge and Obi-Wan, you know, they're fighting fist to fist. With Count Dooku, he just like straight up electrocutes Asajj, and then Asajj, as soon as she comes face to face with Anakin, they start fighting and everything. And with this, it's quite interesting because Grievous is very much like a predator. He starts, like, he doesn't go straight in. So to give you context of the scene, they're like trapped in this ship and they're completely surrounded on the ground by all these battle droids. There's no escape. You could easily just say, march in and kill them, but he decides to toy with them. He climbs up like the side of the ship. You can hear like his footsteps, you know, crawling along the side, and it's really interesting. And then, as you said, he just starts like killing off Jedi, and there's nothing really like it in the series, or like really in, you know, like the films as a whole, because as soon, and this is another topic for another day, but as soon as he's introduced in the future series, so like the 2008 version, Revenge of the Sith as well, he's very much a mustache twirling villain. He's not really, he kind of loses that edge almost. Whereas in this, he's just a straight up killer. Like, he's jumping all over the place, he's outmaneuvering. I remember watching one analysis, someone said that he's even faster than the Force at one bit, because Ki-Adi-Mundi, who's one of the like Jedi Masters of the Council, uses the Force to try and stop him, and he jumps out the way just before, you know, he can get hit. And then he just toys with them, really, and just, he strikes fear in them, and it's just such a highlight. And that iconic scene at the end where Ki-Adi-Mundi, out of like, what, 5 or 6 Jedi, is the only one left. He's standing his ground. General Grievous like jumps in the air to slice him down, and then it's back to like Yoda musing, and then it cuts to credits, and it's like, no, what happens next? And it's
it's such a, like, you really want to know what happens next, and it kind of plays with you in that way.
So, just before we finish, just one bit of really interesting trivia. Apparently, when they created this version of Grievous, the creators decided, because they were told, generally, generally for General Grievous, that he was like a Jedi killer. So they created like this half organic, half robot killing machine for Jedi. But then later on, George Lucas said that he wanted General Grievous to be more like, as I said, a mustache twirling villain, to run away as soon as the bad got going and things, and it just doesn't work later on. But that's a whole other rant. But in the context of this, and it carries on to the second part, which is something we're going to talk about next time, but the character of Grievous as a whole just leaves such an impression, such a good cliffhanger, and yeah, just kind of the final note to an already strong start to this series.
Yeah, for sure. It's a fantastic way to end it. It leaves you on a cliffhanger, and you're really excited for the next section. And yeah, we're gonna talk about more about that in the next episode.
And I can't wait to talk about that because it's got one of the best openings ever. And I think we both agreed that when we were rewatching it, thinking this has got such a good...
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's so good. Before we finish up, is there any final thoughts from your end?
Just that I really recommend that anyone who hasn't already watches it. And yeah, stay tuned for our next episode where we talk about the second part of the show, and you're going to want to listen to that one.
Oh, one more thing, sorry, that I just forgot to bring up earlier. I just wanted to check if you noticed this. So, as I was saying, the fight scene between Ventress and Anakin?
You can talk about the sizzling lightsabers.
Oh, the sizzling lightsabers as well, that is cool. Yeah, they've never done that since. Yeah,
no.
Sorry, just for context, they're standing in the rain and it starts raining and the rain starts bouncing off the lightsabers and sizzling, which might sound like a small thing, but it's really cool. And like sets off the atmosphere. Honestly, me saying this is so cool does not do justice. Go watch it. But there's also another scene that, see when they're fighting in the temple, just going back to what you were saying about Anakin's kind of descent into the dark side, where, see when he's fighting in the temple, did you notice that he's lit up in blue? Obviously because of his lightsaber, and Asajj is lit up in red.
That's very clever.
But when they get to the top of the mountain, or not the mountain, but the top of the temple, where there's a huge like red moon on top, when Anakin like stops her from like chopping him, he like turns bright red because of the moon. But I don't know if that was intentional. Like that was like a subtle always turning dark, because he starts like just wailing on her. Like he just grabs a lightsaber, uses his mechanical hand, which I don't know if that's another jab at him turning into like an inhuman monster, and then he just starts beating her when she's down until she like falls off. I don't know, I just thought that was like a really neat touch, a very subtle touch. But sorry, that was my last point. I just had to like end it on that, because it's such a good series. If you haven't checked it out, go check it out.
Yeah, definitely, and we look forward to talking about it more with you next time.
Cannot wait for that one. So yeah, where can these lovely people who are listening to Satsunami find you, Greenshield?
They can find me on both Twitch and Twitter at Greenshield95. I've been streaming so much lately, but I can be found there, and yeah, follow me on both platforms.
Yep, definitely go check him out. He's an amazing person. I'm not just saying that because you're on the podcast. But no, definitely go check him out. He does amazing content. And yeah, if you want to follow me, you can see me on Twitter, Instagram, YouTube, Twitch, and of course TikTok. I don't know why I said of course TikTok, but pretend that's the flow of it. Under the name Satsunami42. Without any further ado, thank you so much, Andrew, for coming on today.
No problem at all. I look forward to the next one.
Yep, cannot wait. And until then, stay safe, stay awesome, and most importantly, stay hydrated. Bye, guys.
Bye, everyone.